today we have a guest speaker, and the guest speaker is Paul Helstrom. I got the name right. And, and he is, in case you can't read it, he's the programs and services rep for Minnesota Power, and he's going to be talking to us about solar energy and things like that. So if you could, I'm just going to give the mic over to him.
Thanks, Elliot. Hey, everybody, great pleasure to be here. Again, yeah, Paul Helstrom. I work for Minnesota Power, and I've been with the company for about 10 years now. A little bit of background on myself. I am a born and raised native of Duluth, Minnesota. Been coming to Ely basically all my life, going to Boundary Waters and whatnot. I'm a graduate of UC Santa Cruz with environmental studies. And some time ago, I moved back to Duluth for a 6-month stint to learn how to install solar PV. And at that time, I was coming back here to look at where I could go. There were about 4 community colleges, and then there were some organizations that trained people how to, that weren't necessarily electrical engineers or electricians in training how to install solar. Well, I found the Midwest Renewable Energy Association out of Custer, Wisconsin. I went down there and I got training all the while, making ends meet by bartending. And then I've worked with a master trainer at Great Northern Solar. And we trained folks how to install PV all over the place. Then 2009 hit. And 2009 is really the watershed moment for solar electric technology, where it really started going mainstream. The economy for solar really started taking off in 2009. And that little company, while the proprietor, Chris LaForge, is still training, there just wasn't enough room. So I jumped off that ship and then ended up in 2014 getting out of Minnesota Power. I'm very happy to be with Minnesota Power. I think it's a great company. Coming from the solar industry, going into the utility space, it's a very different world. But as far as utilities go, Minnesota Power is fairly unique for a number of reasons. And throughout my presentation today, I mean, there's just a really broad spectrum of things I could talk about when it comes to solar or what are utilities doing in the space of renewables, including solar. And so I have kind of a broad ranging scope here. Please ask questions if you have, as I move through, if this gets more conversational, I'm happy with that. So feel free, just throw your hands up or just shout out and, let's go. Here. Oh, I got to turn it on. Yep. All right, so my agenda is just to give you just a brief overview of Minnesota Power, just general, what we're doing, and then we'll talk about solar more, talk about large scale development. What does that mean? What does it look like? And then I can go into small, private development. That's, rooftop solar is a common term. I don't like that term per se, because lots of people put it on the ground. So, but rooftop solar, and then also I can also talk more about the technology itself and what's going on with that. So Minnesota Power is an elite company, and there's a whole host of other companies. Minnesota Power actually, founded Elite, and so while we are, under the umbrella of Elite, we are Elite. Minnesota Power is the largest single entity within Elite. So our corporate values right now and sort of the corporate vision is what we call sustainability in action. Minnesota Power itself leads the state in renewable deployment, and on a CapEx basis, so based on the amount of capital we have invested in our company, we're like number 2 in the country for investments in renewables. So Minnesota Power customers, just by virtue of being a Minnesota Power customer, get over 50% of their electric energy from renewables. Last year was up closer to 60%. This year we'll probably do pretty good too with all the rain and the extra hydro that we're enjoying right now at our facilities that we have. There's a number of other companies. Elite Clean Energy is a wind development company. We have New Energy Equity, which is a fairly recent acquisition, which is a solar development company. And we have other municipals. We also have a coal mining company called BNI, which is now BNI Energy. So, we have a lot of different resources that we've had over the years. But really, our focus is on expanding renewables, reducing carbon, a focus on our customers, which we have a very unique customer base, enhancing resiliency and driving innovation. So those are sort of corporate values that we're driving in our development. Yeah, so delivering value to our customers, coworkers, communities, investors through sustainable energy solutions. So kind of describes who we are. So going into like Minnesota policy context, Minnesota has been a leader in the nation on renewables. And it starts way back in 1983 when we talk about net metering, which is a really important term that will come up again and again. And that's basically in 1978, the federal government passed what's called PURPA. It's a law that says the states must set up rules so that folks that want to have an alternative energy source like a solar electric system or a wind turbine or a biogas digester, a qualifying facility, a QF, qualifying facility, states must have rules where the utilities must purchase that energy from these small producers. And that was to encourage diversification of our energy. And that was all in reaction, of course, to oil embargo and woes of the early 70s. So 1983, Minnesota set up the rules. And so since that time, we've had basically an average retail rate. So someone installing solar on their home is going to get a retail rate compensation for their small system. And throughout the country, the rules are a little different. The rules are changing. There's all kinds of stuff happening in other states like Hawaii, California, Arizona, you name it. So that's the big topic. But in 2001, there was sort of a soft goal put in place. 2007, the renewable portfolio standard comes into play in Minnesota. So between 2001 and 2007, the writing's on the wall. 2005, Minnesota Power actually starts looking at, hey, let's get ahead of this. That's when we started looking at developing wind turbines, like you might see at Tack Ridge, just outside of Virginia. We have 10 turbines down there. That was the very first wind development, sort of as a reaction to what was coming in 2007, renewable portfolio standard. So 25% of our electricity by 2025. And we beat that. So we were I think it was 2021 is when we hit that goal. So we were ahead of the standard there. So then Paul, myself, comes into play, 2013 law. So thank you, state legislature. They passed a law called the Solar Energy Standard. And that really was the impetus for Minnesota Power looking like, hey, we have to get into promoting more small scale private solar. Let's find some people to help get us into compliance with this law by 2020. So the Solar Energy Standard of 2013 was a driver that said investor-owned utilities need to get 1.5% of their electric sales, retail sales, with exclusions, that's important, by 2020. So that's where I came in and started really helping bring our residential solar rebate program up. We had a program, but really bolstering it and expanding it greatly. So now fast forward 2023, we've met our goal. By the way, we got to the 1.5% plus a 10% carve out of that on small scale, 40 kilowatt and less systems, so small scale. And that's primarily what I've been working on. But 2023, so just last year, the state has now passed, well, there's two things. One thing isn't listed here. It was a carbon-free electric energy by 2040. We already had a goal by 2050. The state shortened that by a decade. So now we are on working on a path towards 100% carbon-free energy by 2040. Another part of that legislative session was called the Distributed Solar Energy Standard. So now we need to get an additional 3% of our retail sales from solar systems that are connected directly to the Minnesota Power distribution system by 2030. So that's a current ongoing sort of development. And there's a lot of activity around that currently in the regulatory arena. Yes, sir. Yes. So the question is, can I unravel the percentage a little bit more? And so one way to say that is for Minnesota Power, as an example, 3% of our electric sales, and it was broken down, right? So the 3% is for Minnesota Power, and this is for investor-owned utilities in the state. So it doesn't apply to, say, like a municipal per se, like Ely. The 3% is equivalent to about 65 to 85 megawatts worth of installed solar capacity on our system. I don't know if that helps. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, all right. So by 2030 now, Minnesota Power is on a path where we're going to have to procure somewhere in the neighborhood of 65 to 85, is probably closer to 65 megawatt worth of solar. And that may or may not mean much to you as far as like, what is a megawatt? What is a kilowatt? And just as an example, 1 megawatt is about 5 acres of solar panels, right? So, we have a 15 megawatt solar site over in Sylvan, just outside of Brainerd, that's over 80 acres of solar panels, right? So we have one in Gene Duluth, it's 1.6, it's 8 acres. Hoyt Lakes, we have another one that's 5.6, and that one is like 40 some acres, 60 acres. A very hard site to do it on bedrock. So that kind of gives you a little bit of context. Our average home needs about 8 kilowatts. So, a very much smaller order of magnitude smaller, Yes, sir. That's a good question. And I don't know. Off the top of my head, I'm not good with those metrics. And also those metrics can be really problematic. And I know that with the utility, when we report, we've actually stopped reporting on carbon offset per se, because you get into a lot of a nuance when you look at what are you offsetting, what energy mix are you offsetting? So if you're offsetting Minnesota Power's energy mix, we're offsetting less and less carbon because we're more and more renewable. If you're offsetting a utility that is 100% coal-fired power plants, that's a different metric. So it's a problematic. So I don't have that metric per se. Like powering homes is another metric that is a little bit easier. So 1 megawatt of solar is going to power about 170 homes, right? Your average consumer, about 10,000 kilowatt hours a year. Okay. So a little bit back to our generation, our supply. Minnesota Power is very interesting, right? So here's North Dakota, and here's a bunch of assets we have, wind assets. Now remember, I said we own BNI Coal, BNI Energy now, and this is where they operate. We bought the interest in that company for this HVDC line, a high voltage direct current line. We bought that asset to transmit power directly into our service territory. So shortly after that is when the energy standards were coming around, and we said, well, look, we're right in the middle of a prime wind resource. We built our first Bison and then Oliver, so we have 850 megawatts worth of wind power that we are able to transmit directly back into our service territory via that HVDC line. It was a great foresight of my predecessors to purchase this. It's a really, really important resource, and it really plays into where we're headed today with connecting asynchronous grids across the country, which requires DC technology. So that's important. You can see here we are. There's the hydro Winton. We have our hydro plants that we own. We now have solar. So there's Hoyt Lakes, Duluth, Sylvan, and Camp Ripley. And then, of course, we have the Great Northern Transmission Line, which was a giant project, just came through not too long ago, which delivers hydropower from Manitoba. So, and And this is how we are able to balance a lot of our renewables. Hydro is not a battery, but it can act sort of like a battery, in that when the wind's not blowing, we can call on Manitoba, we can lean on them a little bit more. And then when the wind's blowing, we can back off on that contract we have with them. So we're able to maintain a little bit higher balance of those renewables, in addition to the ones that we're developing locally. So I want to talk a little bit about integrated resource plans, IRPs, because this is a really important thing and it's a public process. Integrated resource in Minnesota, we have a Public Utilities Commission. So as you're probably aware, long time ago when electricity was being developed, it was sort of a decision that the country made to allow certain companies to have a monopoly on electric service, because it didn't make sense. It's highly capital intense. There's a lot of operations and maintenance costs. And it didn't make sense to have tons and tons of people building power lines to transmit power. And so the social contract was that, hey, said companies, you can have the right and obligation. So we have the right and obligation to serve customers within our service territory, but you're going to be regulated. So, and we are. The Public Utilities Commission in Minnesota basically governs everything we do, from how quickly we answer the phone to how much we're allowed to charge and how much money we can make on a profit basis off the capital we invest, the maximum we're allowed to make. Doesn't guarantee, it's not a guaranteed rate. So right now I think we're at, I think it was 9 point something percent is the max profit we're allowed to make. And that may or may not happen. Usually doesn't, we rarely do you actually meet that. Usually it's somewhat below that because O&M comes into play, operations and maintenance. A big part of the process is called the integrated resource plan. And that is where every couple of years we have to submit to the Public Utilities Commission, and for everyone, every single Minnesotan can go in and read our integrated resource plan. It's really riveting. Volumes, I mean, hundreds of pages of what we're going to do next. But it's gotten more interesting in recent years because it's basically saying, here's where we see our load going, and here's how we're going to meet those needs, right? And so for decades and decades, it was like, well, we have these coal-fired power plants, and load is flat and not growing, and so there really wasn't a lot of excitement. Now, in the new age of energy transition, it's how are we getting more renewables? How are we replacing these very reliable coal-fired power plants with more intermittent resources in order to address the needs of the time? You had a question, sir?
Yeah. For example, for an IR, long
It wasn't a good joke because it landed super flat. So for an IRP, 1,000 pages long, how long is a non-technical summary document?
Right. So yeah, so sort of the executive summary is not very long.
They're about 400 pages.
Yeah. I mean comparatively, but in the executive summary, you can get an idea of what we're doing. But it is an important process. It's not necessarily an everyday person thing, but there are organizations that are watching what we're doing and trying to make sure that what we're doing is going to be in the best interest of our customers and that public interest. So it's required planning. It's a 15-year outlook. We're currently in another planning phase. So actually we have folks that are traveling around our service territory, holding public meetings and informing folks kind of where we're going or where we think we're going. And the group, our strategy and planning group that performs this, runs just thousands and thousands and thousands of model runs on all the different kinds of resources that are out there and what might be suitable and economic. So everything from, pumped hydro storage to battery storage to wind, solar. We don't do so much in nuclear because it's moratorium in Minnesota, but we're looking at all the different resources that may be available and how are we going to meet the anticipated load over the next 15 years. And we do that every couple of years. So we're always out 15, and there's also usually 30-year outlooks. The result of our most recent completed IRP was that the Public Utilities Commission ruled that we are going to go out and get 300 megawatts of solar and 300 megawatts of wind, and also work on a large scale storage pilot. So we have gone through the request for proposals process for both the wind and the solar. And I know there's work being done on trying to figure out how to implement a large scale storage system now. So those are really important for the integrated resource plan is a very important tool that the public has, and it insights into what is going to be happening. So, yes, sir.
Is large scale storage a new concept, or is it something you have levels of already?
Right. So the question was about large scale storage, is that a new concept? Yes, large scale storage is really just starting to come into its own. And when we talk about utility scale storage, it's about duration versus a lithium ion battery is really good at short term energy storage, 4-hour, 8-hour batteries. And really, when there's something like a polar vortex, and we work within a large footprint, like Minnesota Power is one small player in what's called the Mid-Continent Independent Service Operator, MISO, which goes from Alberta down to the border of Texas, right? And that whole grid is synchronized. So when there's a heat dome over Missouri and their AC is cranked, we may have impacts up here that we have to, or the polar vortex when it's really cold, we need long term. So we're looking at 8, 12-hour or longer batteries. And those industries are really spinning up rapidly. And so looking at those technologies that are there. So it's new. We don't have anything like that. We have very small storage capabilities.
Cost-wise, which is of the 3 resources that you have right now, how effective are they, and which ones are which is most cost effective at this point?
So the question was, out of the resources we have, which are the most cost effective? So we currently operate natural gas, coal-fired power plant, solar, wind, and hydro.
Yeah.
And so out of those, my understanding is sort of the most, the wind power sort of wins the day right now on the least cost energy. In fact, sometimes based on markets, it's negative pricing. So, and then I think coal is probably really close after that. In our region, solar is pretty far to the top. Sort of one of the more costly energy resources that we can deploy.
How much thought is nuclear in your planning?
So because there's a moratorium in Minnesota on nuclear development, we really don't put much weight on nuclear because it's kind of a dead end for us. Nuclear may be a part of the market purchases that we make. So it is in the mix in a way, but it's not something we actively are planning to build. There we go.
So just out of curiosity, for your large scale storage, does that include iron air battery technology or new types of technologies like
Right. So iron air, I know I think Excel is actually working on a large scale iron air, and I think that all of those technologies would be considered, right? So all of the different types of storage, iron air or sodium ion or lithium ion type batteries, pump storage, so all types of storage, and some of those flow batteries as well. So definitely under consideration. And I think, likely Excel will get good experience with that and proving ground on those, but it's an up and coming and more promising technology.
Question back here.
Yeah.
Do you consider pumped hydro storage?
Yes.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Pumped
Thank
hydro. Yep.
I'd like to thank you for your commitment to renewables.
Yeah. You bet. All right. So Just moving on here. So solar development. So when we think about solar development on a larger scale, so I'm talking megawatt class solar. So and I know there was some interest by some folks in that there, and there has been for years on getting a kind of a larger installation somewhere, right? And so as I brought up that integrated resource plans on purpose because part of that and that distributed solar energy standard of last year is driving, some potential development. So what does it take to develop a larger solar project? It's not easy. It's highly competitive. So, I mean, as soon as that law was even being proposed, people had groups had boots on the ground, even before that, literally driving up and down power lines, finding substation, looking at county land map, finding landowners and saying, hey, you might have a site for solar. So there's a highly competitive, international market for solar development. And really there's, kind of some key players, landowners, developers, and utilities are kind of the three major key players. So we see a lot of opportunity, and especially in our Western area where we have more farmland, it's flat, not as much forest. It's fairly easy in some of these soil types to think piling into the ground. Those tend to be real prime targets for areas to develop in. So a lot of farmers are finding a 25-year or 30-year lease, which can be double, triple, quadruple the price they can get per acre for farming it as a really attractive option. So landowners are very important. The developer either try to purchase, but oftentimes will come up with a land lease option on properties. Developers are coming in and they're looking for a certain number of things. So, what goes into it? Location. How close to nearby infrastructure are you? That would be like a substation. If you're close to a substation, you're more likely to have a more prime site for a solar. Part of that though is loading. How big is that substation? How much loading is on there? How much solar could you actually put on a substation before it's hitting our transmission system and goes into these other processes? What is the land use? Is it prime agricultural land? Is it marginal? Are there wetlands? These are all really important. Is it formerly a wetland? And so like if you stop farming it, does it, how are the authorities going to view that? So there's a lot that goes into assessing these properties. And a lot of that then is also process and transaction costs. It can take years and years for a large solar array to get through a process and to building, like many years. Short term would be 2 years, and outside, 5-10 years. I have some customers that have been waiting over 10 years with solar developers saying, hey, you got a good site, let's just keep it in, on the shelf until the right time. And those right times are starting to come up now. But yeah, you had a question. I can repeat it too.
Just to maybe illustrate the complexity of your job. So substations, Ely has 2. How many do they have in Duluth? How many do they have in all of Cook County? Do you, off the top of your head, do you know how diverse Minnesota Power's areas are?
Yep, that's a good question. So yeah, there are substations all over the place, and substations vary in what they are. I'm not an electrical engineer, and I don't work in our distribution group. I work with our distribution group a lot. And I know that Minnesota Power itself has over 250 substations. Now, some of those are literally just like a very small step down station. And some of them are very large where you have transmission coming in from many different places at very, very high voltages, and then is feeding out across our service territory on other transmission lines, like our Arrowhead substation near Duluth, which is it's a giant footprint. Outside of Ely, when you're going down one, there's one right outside town. And then there's also then the co-op. Co-ops have theirs, and GRE, who generally feeds a lot of the co-ops, will have theirs. And sometimes we have joint ownership, or we may have a breaker spot in their substation it can get very complicated as to who owns what and where is it going and what is that loading. But there are processes in place to sort of for developers to inquire and find out more information on those substations. So if they think, hey, here's an empty field, nobody's been using it for 10 years, willing farmer, they can say, here's our spot we want to connect, and they can just send us $300 and we do a quick report that says, here's the substation that we recommend, here's how much loading's on it, here's how big it is, here's where it goes, here's limiting factors on that, like the conductor or, are there regulators, so the general information that'll give them a gut feel, hey, this is a good site, or it's not, this really isn't going to work out. They don't have to invest a lot of time. That's funny. That's my old boss, Chris LaFoy, just called me. Yes, sir.
I've got a couple of questions always, but is there any effort to reduce the amount of electricity that the general customer uses? And if we ramp that effort up, that makes the other side of the equation much easier. And without lowering our consumption, it's an impossible goal to meet.
Yep, that's a good question. Yes, and that is actually part of state law. And Minnesota Power has actually been a state leader for over 12 years now. We've met our goals every year on energy conservation. So this is where you see like utilities offering rebates to put in now. Air source heat pumps are a big item, right? Cold climate air source heat pumps are a nice, very efficient way to versus like baseboard electric heating or something like that. So there is a lot. Every single year, Minnesota Power is saving millions, tens of millions of kilowatt hours are being taken off our load by energy efficiency. LED lighting, right? Yeah, it is, and that's the team I work most directly with. I sit with the programs and services team, and they deliver day after day these rebate programs. So helping customers understand how you're using energy. So we've had home energy audits for years, where we have an expert come into your home and say, you need to do some air sealing, your furnace needs to be replaced, what have you, right? And that has been also a big responsibility of, getting LED lighting so mainstream, was all these programs kind of hammering at, hey, get a rebate, get an LED light. They last longer, they take way less. So yeah. However, the counter side is, now what are we doing? I drove my electric car here. I didn't drive a gas car here, but that cost, like 15 kilowatt hours just to get here, so we're shifting, we're going to be shifting load away from, which is, good, right? It's good to not use as much gas, but where's that electricity coming from? How are we getting that electricity? And then also AI is a big topic for a lot of reasons. Huge energy hog. I mean, every time you do a chat GPT, there is a computer whirring away, right? And the electric demand of data centers and AI is huge. And we're at the tip of the iceberg. So there's going to be a large, and so Minnesota Power, one of the big things we're looking at right now is our region is becoming a real focal point for data centers. It could be a real significant source of load growth for Minnesota Power, which we like. Yay, more sales, good for everybody. They're huge energy hogs. But our region, we're geologically stable, geopolitically, we're pretty stable. The climate is cool, and cooling is one of the largest loads in a data center. So if they can just open a door, I mean, it's not that simple, but if they can just, the cooling load is a lot easier in our region. So there's a lot of anticipated growth in that sector of our society. So there are other things that are going to be pushing, while we lower demand for heating and cooling potentially, but then you also have these other side effects, right? It's just complicated, isn't it? Like climate change, if you got more heat domes, you've got more load. So even though we put all this energy efficiency stuff in, it may be driving some of that. So how do we get there, right? Another question? You just ask, I'll repeat it.
Yeah,
New York Times the other day, a big article about a new development in Germany and the popularity of self-installed plug and play solar outfits. Did you see that?
Oh, oop.
Can't ask what.
Well, you can ask the question. I mean, I'm familiar with the
I
technologies.
just wondered if it's going to spread. Development, low cost,
Right.
simple solar systems,
Right,
self-installed. If they're option
right,
and, not much money involved.
right. So
Good to be true.
right, so plug and play, you know, is one thing. You still have to follow all the codes and regulations. So, you know, there have been products that have come around, even a Minnesota made called Solar Pod, where they literally had it where you could connect, you know, you could literally plug this thing in, right? You get a dedicated outlet. No, that is not kosher when it comes to you know, the code regulators. They're like, no, you cannot do that. You can't have this generator backfeeding a breaker in your garage. You kidding me? You still have to follow all those codes, but the solar technology is a very elegant technology. And that's kind of where I was starting to go next. And if you're not familiar with the photovoltaic, the PV, right? Basically, what is it? It's a rock that is sitting out in the sun and producing energy. I mean, there's no moving parts. And it's highly durable. It'll last a long, long time. And the technologies have continued to advance. We're getting better at manufacturing. We're getting better at creating more shade tolerant solar modules by how we're cutting the cells and connecting them together in a module. And it all starts with, if you want to see, this is hyper pure silicon. I brought some samples. This is what they use to make solar panels out of. It's, you know, refined rock, right? They melt it down. They create these ingots and they laser them apart. So everything is moving towards plug and play, right? Like just a simpler installation, right? So you'll still have professionals that'll be using these same technologies, but you will have more integrated parts and components that'll make it quicker. So in the United States, our average cost to install is higher than Germany. Germany has been on the forefront of solar photovoltaics for decades. And they really got to a point where their soft cost, the labor cost and all that really have driven the markets worldwide. Now they've really lost out to China and other groups from a manufacturing standpoint, but they still have some of the foremost institutes for research and development on the technology. So these more or less plug and play, it's just a natural progression of the technology to make it cheaper to install, which will get more and more deployment then.
I was exaggerating the simplicity of the German system. It still has all the elements and they don't
Right.
recommend that you install it yourself. This is really plug and play. They called it that way, I think.
Yeah.
It's plug and play. It's plug and play. I lived in Germany 3 years. You buy that off the rack. It has a normal plug. You plug it in your outlet, uses electricity, it goes back into your net.
Right.
Just like this.
Right.
But you're
Yeah.
about 400 watt. You more than 400 watt working anymore.
Right. And 400 watt in the US is near next to nothing. Yeah, so and in Germany, you know, again, they've just been on the forefront from a policy perspective. The Energiewende was the major policy that basically drove the global market up. They got, you know, and they're paying for it too. I mean, it ends up being a subsidization. So the cost of their electricity had to go up to pay for their feed-in tariffs and all that. Getting down a little bit of a rabbit hole there. So I was going to show you some, I just want everyone to be aware, and I'm going to show these, I have these 2 links here to these advertisements. And the first one is like, imagine never paying for electricity again. Solar can do that for you and it costs like next to nothing. Like, what are you waiting for? You know, send us your money. There's a lot of deceptive advertising out there right now that, you know, solar energy is free. It's going to eliminate your electric bill, all of those things. And this is a buyer beware message. That's my PSA for today. It's not free. It's a 10-year payback. I don't think it'll work well, because they go to the, yeah, it's all right. And then I had another one, which is like more of an honest opinion from this guy, and he's not necessarily doing himself any favors, but he is being honest. He's saying, I'm not going to tell you solar is free. It's not. It's going to take, it's a good investment, but it depends on who you are and what your goals are, and it's a big investment. You know, it's average homeowner's got to spend $30,000 to put the system in, right? How much do you pay in electric bills, and how long will it take you to pay that off? Now there's incentives, and you know it may or may not be that expensive, but it's a 10-year payback for an average homeowner. Based on when you install it, it'll take 10 years for that system to pay itself off. But again, it's a rock sitting in the sun, and if your roof is there 30 years from now, that solar panel is likely to still be producing power 30 years, 40 years. When Minnesota Power builds a large scale plant, we book those for 30, 35-year life before we're looking to repower those interconnections.
I have a quick question. You may have answered this already. Obviously came in late, but are there any discounts to energy at night for charging an electric car?
Depending on your utility, there are,
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I'm just asking you, do you do it? Does Minnesota Power do it?
Yeah, so I work for Minnesota Power, so I have a perk. I can charge in our parking ramp. I bought an electric car and I haven't installed a charger at my house.
Charging at work, I know.
I tried it, but yes, so Minnesota Power, we have options, right? So one is we have a whole home time of use rate right now. So that automatically, and that could go for not just your electric car, but if you're drying clothes or heating water electrically, you could do that at night and get the off-peak rate. We have a second service rate. So you could install a full second service with a second meter and get a super cheap off-peak EV. It's for EVs only. So it's like for your electric vehicle. So if you had a garage and it had a separate meter and really all you have in the garage is lights and a garage door opener kind of thing, you could switch that over and you get like under 4 cents per kilowatt hour charging for your electric vehicle. Super cheap. And then we have a commercial option as well, which is aimed more at curbing demand charges for higher powered, fleet, stuff like that, where we cap the amount that they might get charged on demand.
If Lake Country does that?
I don't know if Lake Country has any specific EV rates right now. So, good question. So back to solar as the customer and what to consider. And how am I doing on time here? I got about 5 minutes. So I'll just roll through this, and then of course keep the questions coming. It's really important to understand the process a customer goes through, right? As the customer, if you're thinking about solar, the very first thing you need to ask yourself is, what are your goals? Like, why are you doing this? Is it strictly a financial? Again, I told you it's 10 years to pay it off. Is that worth it? Or is it better to invest in Rivian or something like that if you're looking at just a financial gain? If you're into it because of a green ethic, because you want to feel like you're part of a solution, that might be a good reason. That might take off some of that, 10-year payback thing. Do you have a good site? That kind of stuff. So customers need to research and learn what technology and the installers in their area. Again, you don't want to, the installer that's telling you need to sign today or the deal's gone, drop them now. Just drop them, because that's not true. It's a long-term investment. But they're out there, and I have a lot of customers calling me and say, well, I said I had to do it like today. I'm like, sorry, take your time. It's going to be okay. Understanding that the authorities will be involved. And the authorities, I mean, utilities. We have some authority over what gets connected to a system that we're serving, because there's an interaction between our distribution system and the home. And then there's going to be electrical inspectors. So if you don't have a city inspector for electricity, like in Duluth, there'll be a state inspector, and they will be involved. So if you're going to do it yourself, you need to know those codes and regulations as well. But installers are going to take care of most of that. And what are the payments? What are the costs? What are the operations and maintenance consideration? And again, there's not a lot for solar, no moving parts, but you still have to, there's some maintenance and things you'll want to pay attention to. And then the processes. Utility has a process called the interconnection process, and that's where you send an application in, and this is a statewide. There is a sort of a flat sort of general guideline for a process called the Minnesota Distributed Energy Resource Interconnection Process, MINDIP for short. So the MINDIP process is just that every utility has basically the same set of rules that we kind of play by. Municipals have a little bit of different, municipals and co-ops have a little bit of different leeway in how they compensate customers, but we all run through the same interconnection process technically. So that's part of that process. If you hire a installer, they're gonna do that process for you. Get the drawings together and submit them and have the review and answer the questions we have. And then rebates. So Minnesota Power, for the last 10 years, I've been running our rebate program. It's called Solar Sense. Used to be you could get $20,000 from Minnesota Power for installing a system. And it's based on system size. Now that's down to a $5,000 cap based on expected performance. And we are currently in front of our Public Utilities Commission asking them to put an income limit on it. So we're moving away from basically giving rebates to affluent customers and more towards middle and low income customers, the market segments which have been lower to adopt the technology. So it's all part of a sort of getting more of a just energy movement. So just making sure that some folks who maybe wouldn't get there can get there sooner, because oftentimes they're the most burdened by their energy costs. So we're moving that direction. Yeah. And again, permitting and inspections are important. So again, I already talked about payback incentives. The other incentive that everyone can get, maybe, is the investment tax credit. So you can get 30% of the cost of your system paid for or through your taxes. So basically your tax liability. So if you put in a $30,000 system, you'll get about $9,200 in tax credits. You have to owe the government $9,200. So does it take 2 years, 3 years, 1 year? With the Inflation Reduction Act, they actually expanded that nonprofits and governmental organizations, those kinds of organizations, can get a direct pay, so a rebate from the government on that 30%. And then there's adders. You can get adders for being in a low-income community, on a tribal nation, or in an energy community. You can add 10% for those items on top. So that's a big benefit, especially to nonprofit and non-government or governmental organizations that can now take advantage of the Inflation Reduction Act investment tax credit. The rate hedge. When you put solar in for the next 30 years, it's going to be taking care of some of your energy, and you're going to be offsetting. So as utility rates go up, and they're going to go up, no problem there. Next, I say my crystal ball says 2050 we'll see kind of a evening out, because we will have made a lot of the investments we need to make by 2050 in renewable resources. And then as we depreciate those assets and they continue to produce, they have generally lower O&M than coal. So we'll start to see a leveling off. But for the next decades, your utility rates are going up because we're building lots and lots of new stuff. And I haven't gotten the question on our acquisition yet, but property values. Property values are a little more mushy in our region. In California, there's really clear evidence that you put solar on the house, it increases the value by so much. In Minnesota, we don't have as much, so it's not as clear, but certainly it's an attractant. I installed a solar array on my house and I moved a year later. And not the best from the solar perspective, not the best choice, but definitely the couple that moved from California and bought my house, it was an attractant. They liked that. They liked that there was a solar array. I don't know that it really added any value to my house, because property values were crazy anyways. So it's like, who knows? At a high level, what you can expect right now is if you get a system installed, it's going to be about somewhere in the neighborhood of $3.20 a watt. So again, an average home needs about an 8 kilowatt system. So that's $3,200 per kilowatt. So what are we at? 20 in the mid 20s to $30,000 range. Again, if you have geothermal heat and a hot tub and electric sauna, and you rocking out on a guitar band every night in your garage, you're going to need a bigger system. If you're reading by LED lights once a week or by candlelight, you need less. So, yeah, and really that, again, that important consideration, how long you can be in that space. So are you in your forever home? It's probably a really good investment then. If you're not, if you're moving in 5 years, maybe not the best financial investment. So I just want to be respectful of time. I'm 2 minutes over one now. And I'm kind of towards the end. I have a ton more slides on my presentation about technology and what it is, but I kind of got through most of what I wanted to in consideration of development, residential, what we're doing as a utility.
One more quick question.
Yeah.
Are you seeing a reduction in the amount of electricity that you have to make because of consumer solar? In other words,
No.
No, you're not.
No.
You're using more.
Okay, and again, yeah, that's right. So for Minnesota Power in particular, because we serve iron mines, paper mills, which are just incredible loads, like some of the largest loads in the whole country. So a typical utility in the United States is usually, they kind of split into thirds. Like they're a third residential, a third commercial, a third industrial, right? Somewhere in there, right? That's kind of like this typical, and maybe this less industrial and more commercial or more residential, but they're somewhere in there. We're at 14% residential and we're 65% industrial. So the way we look to, that's why Minnesota Power it kind of explains why we are kind of on the forefront. Like we've always looking for the change coming, because when the iron mine gets a cold, we got pneumonia. Like if they shut down, 65% of our sales, like if all the iron mines went away, we're bankrupt. I mean, 65% of your sales disappeared.
Happened in 1982. So
Right, yeah, and so that's a lot of like why there's a lot of looking to be diverse and nimble and trying to figure that out. So for us, even at a pace, and what I've seen in my time when I started at Minnesota Power, we were doing like 20 interconnections. 20 customers got solar in a year, 2014, maybe 30. Today I'm processing over 200 applications a year. So we're seeing the hockey stick curve of more and more people wanting to do it. The cost is right. Utility rates are doing the right thing. They're going up. More and more people are pulling the trigger. But at this point, even then, it's still a very small percentage of our average of our sales. Like it's almost, it's not that significant yet, right?
We've been looking at opportunities to get our Ely schools to install solar. There are a couple of programs. The Minnesota Department of Commerce offers a 40% rebate of the cost. And then the Inflation Reduction Act comes in for Ely, that would be another 40% reduction of the cost. So if Ely schools wanted to go this way, they would get an array at only 20% of the actual cost to buy and install it. And we calculate that their payback time would be about 4.5 years.
Yep.
And so
Kind of a no-brainer.
After that length of time, that is from year 5 through year 25 or 45, I don't know what that number is. After that length of time, they actually make money off this. And so they could make
Big cost savings, right?
hire another teacher. So we're hoping that we can convince these schools to go this way.
Yep.
What is the arrangement with the municipality?
Mm-hmm.
We're not dealing direct.
So that's a statewide program for the schools that she was talking about. So it has nothing to do Ely. So, but you have to have the school district is the key, right? You have to have a champion in the school district saying ready to put those applications in. Now, July 30th, today, is that today? Is literally the deadline for the readiness for this next round of applications. And I don't mean to be the bearer of bad news, but all indications are that the money is going to be gone unless the legislature appropriates more money. But they had originally appropriated 8 million, and then they appropriated another 29 million. And I have seen just dozens of school projects come through. So it's been a really positive program, and it is kind of a no-brainer. I mean, your school district will instantly start saving money. And after 4 years, pay off a capital investment like that. That's going to last the school 30 years. And so it's going to reduce your operating costs. Like it's significant. So hopefully they'll re-up some money. That's another good advocacy point for folks to tell their legislators, hey, let's keep the ball rolling because that money's going to run out soon.
We're gonna go back past the time, but Paul, if you're willing to stay for a
Yeah,
couple minutes.
I'll be here.
The climate group will be continuing the conversation, so thank you so much, Paul, for
Thank you for having me.
participating us. We appreciate you.
Yeah. Thanks so much.